Okay, hey guys, it's Matt here. I'm going to do a little talk on Michael Levin. Shouldn't take too long. I'm going to share this with two of the sort of philosophical groups that I'm a member of, and one is the Cheltenham UK philosophers, and the other is the 21st century Hermetic idealists with Stephen and Co. So I'm hoping to sort of pitch this in such a way that it kind of might appeal or make sense to both audiences. Um, so here goes. Michael Levin, who is he? He's a sort of developmental biologist with what can only be described as sort of extremely progressive ideas about the sort of nature of biology and sort of how to approach challenges with developmental biology. So looking at things like birth defects and deformities, biomorphic deviations from the plan, so to speak, and how to address some of this stuff, and potentially how to address problems of sort of things like limb regrowth, which we know happens in humans up to sort of the age of 5 or 6, I think. Little fingers can be regrown and so on children, but then for some reason that stops happening in adults. So he actually has sort of biomedical challenges, and apparently gets lots of email traffic from people saying, "Come on, get this work sorted so you can heal my condition." So what's sort of unique about Michael Levin? What sort of distinguishes him from the crowd, and what makes it the case that sort of everyone seems to be saying he's going to win the Nobel Prize? I'm now saying this because everyone else is. I first came across him on Kurt Jaimangel's show, The Theories of Everything, and Jaimangal himself introduced Levin as almost certainly going to win the next Nobel Prize. So what is it that distinguishes him? Well, there's a few things about his work that just are absolutely staggering and just mind-blowing when you first encounter it. And the first thing is this thing called a sort of bioelectric field, right? Now, just sort of wind back a little bit and say, look, from what Levin's saying, I'm no expert on this stuff, but Levin is saying that essentially DNA stores the details of how to construct proteins, right? For specific purposes, so kind of, liver cells, kidney cells, brain cells. It knows how to produce. It has the instruction sets for building these proteins, which are kind of like the Lego bricks of our body, right? But it doesn't contain the instructions for where to put things, and it doesn't contain the instructions for the sort of chirality, the sidedness, so left and right, and to where to put things. And it's not really understood exactly where that information is stored. The body and the cells just seem to know where to go, right? Now, one thing they've observed during sort of embryonic development, I don't know what animal it was, with the presence of these what they're calling these bioelectric fields, and they detected them by putting some agent in the fluids that was electrosensitive, right? So I mean, this is quite simple stuff, and this technique's been around for a long time, but I don't think anyone's ever tried it. Although Levin does talk about some preceding thinkers. I'll get to that later. And so what they're seeing are these kind of bioelectric fields where there's these increased voltages in certain areas, and those fields are taking the shape of things like faces, right? And lo and behold, that is where the face develops on this creature, right? I mean, that's just absolutely astonishing. So they're saying that there's this kind of electromagnetic activity sort of going on among the cells, sort of somewhere, within that area that is kind of almost like telling the cells to be a face, right? And no doubt it will probably be observed that there's bioelectric fields sort of telling kidneys to be, telling cells to be kidneys and arrange themselves in a certain way, and so on and so forth, right? So this, this seems it could almost be the sort of first glimpse of the kind of the software that that determines how cells are put together and organs and so on and so forth, right? So that's just utterly astonishing already, and they've got video footage of this stuff. So this is all completely empirically verifiable, right? And it also brings in the other sort of question that could we possibly influence that field, right? If there's a field telling these cells what to do, well, what if we could develop some sort of interface that allowed us to, generate these fields? So could we say regrow a limb or something? So just we know what a limb growing bioelectric field looks like, so somehow deploy that where there's a missing limb and see if you can get one to grow. But this total speculation there, but these are the sorts of potentialities here. So it's kind of like, and a lot of this stuff depends on his fundamental view of what sort of life and biology is, right? If I could learn to speak again. Just one sec. And for him, he doesn't really draw a distinction between extremely basic looking systems and more complex systems. And for him, cognition of some sort goes all the way down, right? So just bear that in mind when we sort of go on to the other stuff. And he's saying that, rather than try to sort of biomechanically reconstruct cells and limbs and so on, or maybe use drugs and so on, just try to persuade the body to do stuff that it already kind of clearly knows how to do, right? So that's quite interesting. So he's also got this project going called I think it's Technical Analysis of Mind Everywhere. So it's TAME, right? And it's basically this idea that elements of mentation just exist everywhere around us, wherever we look, right? And he would even he would say, look, if you tell me that a stone rolling down a hill is not an intelligent system, he said, well, prove it, right? So he sort of turned things on its head. I mean, we tend to say, well, intelligent life only exists in dogs and above, right? I mean, he just throws that out of the water completely. I mean, I've seen these videos on his talks where he shows these single cells that seem to sort of change direction and have volition. They have a sort of goal-directed behaviour, and they can delay gratification and so on and so forth. And this is a single cell. There's no brain. There's no neural network. I mean, if this Stuart Hameroff guy who works with Roger Penrose, right, on their microtubular theory of consciousness and stuff like that, if he's to be believed, then single cells actually contain these things called microtubules, and he reckons that they themselves are capable of really complex computational tasks and so on. And I mean, if that's true, then the capacity of the human brain to do calculations is vastly increased beyond current sort of estimates, right? So let's think a bit more about Levin. So think about some of the findings he's made, right? So there's these. So take frogs, and they've got these tadpoles, and they call them Picasso tadpoles, where they kind of mess around. I'm not the ethics of this. I'm not entirely sure about, but they kind of mess around with the position of things like the eyes and nose and so on the tadpole's body, right? But then what happens when it metamorphoses into the adult frog? Everything returns to the correct position, right? So it doesn't become an adult frog with the Picasso face. Its features are actually returned into this model of that frog. So you might ask yourself, well, where is that? So how do the cells know that there's this goal of this particular morphology? Well, where is that information stored? And Levin isn't saying he knows, but it's something to do with this bioelectric field, right? Now, not only that. So I'm staying with frogs. They took these frog skin cells, right, and put them in a sort of unique environment where they were no longer connected with the frog, right? And you'd think, well, skin cells, they wouldn't be able to do much, right? They probably just sort of sit together in some kind of mono-dimensional sort of lattice to sort of create something like skin, right? But lo and behold, these skin cells, given the right stimulus, they started forming sort of compound units where they sort of joined together and developed certain capabilities, sort of mobility. They started consuming food and then replicating themselves as well. So replicating this new form that Levin's calling the xenobot, right? He's saying, because this creature's never existed before, unless there was some identical biologist somewhere millions of years ago doing the same thing. But apart from that crazy, minuscule possibility, these are new creatures. So they're calling them xenobots. So that's really interesting. So it isn't, the destiny of a cell isn't necessarily just to form, do as it's told, and form part of a sort of larger cooperation, right? They can be told to do other things. They can be asked or reasoned with, right? So keep that in mind, and think about another thing that he flags up and says, which is in this space, which is the idea of limb regrowth, right? And we mentioned that even human children sort of regrow sort of single, possibly even two phalanges on their fingers, up to like the age of 5 or 6. You've got the various lizards and amphibians that regrow limbs, and the question there is, well, look, it's astonishing enough that it's able to regrow a limb, but ask the question, how does it know where to stop? Right. So again, where is that blueprint of the body, the goal state of that cooperation of that cooperative of cells? Where's that stored? But the thing is, it is stored somewhere, right? Now this gets really interesting when you look at things like caterpillars, and going back to the subject of metamorphosis, right? So caterpillars kind of go into a cocoon, and their bodies are essentially turned to mush, right? They sort of literally kind of liquidize themselves, right? And then everything is kind of rebuilt and restructured to become the resulting butterfly. Yeah. So their brain, any organs, any sort of internal structure is just literally dissolved, okay, and then reconstituted as the butterfly. Now, what's crazy about this is that those caterpillars can be taught things, right, and they can be given memories of solving certain problems and things like that, and that can be tested because they can then sort of see whether the butterfly remembers them, and lo and behold, they do, right? So the memory of some of that problem solving, some of that behaviour and reinforcement is still intact, in spite of the fact that its brain and everything has been turned to mush. And I've talked elsewhere, from the sort of idealist perspective of this notion of brain activity potentially going almost to zero, and yet people are still having conscious experiences. And this reminds me of that. How is it that butterfly remembers the caterpillar's lessons if the caterpillar's brain's been turned to mush? Well, it shows that information, memories and stuff is not stored in the brain, right? There's also, for me, there's a link. I'm nearly done now, by the way. I'm just giving a very sort of brief overview. There's also a link from this to Rupert Sheldrake and his polymorphic resonance. I mean, he thinks that there's this sort of resonance field sort of in and around bodies, and that's where the goals are stored. That's where the sort of idealized sort of information of the body and so on is stored. He's kind of a bit of a Neoplatonist because Plato believed in this kind of realm of ideal objects from which earthly versions were just sort of inherited from these ideal objects. So you'd have this kind of ideal object of a horse, or the ideal number 3, and then in the world you get the various manifestations of these ideas, right? So there's something sort of quite Platonic about this, about Sheldrake's view that there's these sort of fields. I don't know what he thinks they are. I mean, I don't know what his metaphysics are. I mean, he seems extremely open-minded. He used to hang around with Terence McKenna, the big sort of psychedelic philosopher, who also actually probably a Neoplatonist, thinking about it. But yeah, back on track with Levin. I think there's a dotted line from his work to Sheldrake, who talks about these polymorphic resonance fields beautifully, because two of my favourite thinkers. I mean, Levin is a practicing professor. I mean, he runs his own research department. He's works with loads of commercial organisations and stuff with this sort of xenobotics or whatever it is exactly he does. And he's hooked up with Castrup, Bernardo Castrup, the idealist philosopher. So for me, it's kind of like I say, it's unclear what Levin's saying in terms of his metaphysics. about the fundamental nature of reality. But him and Kastrup agree on just about everything, right? Kastrup talks about single life forms as being dissociated alters of the sort of the one mind, and Levin doesn't sort of disagree with that. Levin also likes the idea that mentation is everywhere. Obviously, he's got his own research project called Technical Analysis of Mind Everywhere, where they look at really crazily basic systems, sorting algorithms and things like that, and they can demonstrate that there's some kind of delayed gratification involved, even with basic systems like that. But I mean, at the moment, what they're trying to do is persuade human cells, sort of train human cells to do what they're told, and this obviously has implications for cancer and so on. So yeah, I mean, the guy is cutting edge. His work touches limb regrowth, developmental biology. It touches sort of cancer research. But I mean, he's a very philosophical character himself, and sees the value of trying to get to the heart of what we're really talking about when we talk about things like life. And if you listen to his cast and stuff, you'll hear that he's not really happy to stick a dividing line. For him, cells have some sort of cognition, so he would definitely admit that viruses are on the spectrum, shall we say. And then you'd have to really pin him down to get him to say that things like weather perhaps don't have some sort of basic basal cognition, right? So yeah, I mean, he's a really, really interesting character. Thoroughly recommend exploring his work, and see what you think and let me know. Cheers. Goodbye.